Polish cinema is symbolized during this Berlinale by the Golden Bear being given to Andrzej Wajda. And Poland had successive waves of seemingly one great filmmaker after another. You started in the years after the war with people like Alexander Ford and Jerzy Kawalerowicz, and then you went on to Wajda, of course, and Andrzej Munk, and then Polanski, Skolimowski, and then Zanussi in the 70s. And by the time Kieslowski came to the fore, I would say, unfortunately, Eastern European cinema was beginning to decline in the eyes of the critical West. We were not so impressed anymore with Eastern European cinema in the 80s as we had been in the 60s. And so it took a long time for him to be recognized. And I remember in the spring of 1980, a very good Swiss friend of mine who's passed away now, Felix Bucher, called me from Switzerland and said, I've just come back from Warsaw and I've seen this film called Camera Buff, Movie Buff. And you've got to put this man on the cover of the International Film Guide, which was an annual I then edited, and we used to have 5 directors of the year on the cover. And I looked at his name and I thought, have I spelt it correctly? Because there are so many Z's and K's and S's. And he said, yes, you've got to do this. So we put him on the cover, and that book came out in November 1980. But it wasn't for about 6 or 7 years after that, when the Decalogue appeared, that gradually Kieslowski began to percolate the conscience of Western critics and Western audiences. And of course, then when he went to France in the final years of his life and made this glorious quartet of films, Double Life of Veronique, which introduced us to Irene Jacob, and then the trilogy Blue, White, and Red. And these were triumphs wherever they were shown. I'm going to present our panel, and I'm going to show a very, very early short from Kieslowski. Wim Wenders needs hardly any introduction, but unfortunately I think he deserves one. Today he is president of the European Film Academy, but long ago he was graduating from high school in Oberhausen at exactly the moment when the new German cinema was being born at the festival in that city. And Wim is known for his mesmerizing and often profound studies of alienation in the modern world, whether in Germany or the United States. Paris, Texas won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and Wings of Desire won him the Best Director Award at the same festival, as well as the European Film Award for the Best Film of the Year. He also won the Golden Lion at Venice for The State of Things. He's best known beyond the domain of the film buff for his affectionate and evocative documentary on Cuban music, the Buena Vista Social Club. And Wim is one of the great friends of the campus. He was our first mentor at the very first campus. He's always available to young filmmakers wherever he is, and we're delighted to have him back. Thank you for coming, Wim. Agnieszka Holland, on my right, has had her finger on the pulse of Polish cinema at many of its greatest moments. But she's also forged a distinctive career for herself beyond the borders of her native land. She began as an assistant to Krzysztof Zanussi, but she also was an assistant, in part, on Man of Marble for Wajda, but she was then politically incorrect, so she had to leave that film and had the good fortune to be allowed to make her own first film. But she's worked very closely with Wajda, and of course with I'm thinking of films like Danton, for example, A Love in Germany, and Korczak. And Kieslowski asked her to be script consultant on 3 colors, red, white, and blue. Agnieszka's features include Europa, Europa, To Kill a Priest, The Secret Garden, and Total Eclipse. And her latest film in post-production is Copying Beethoven. Agnieszka knew Kieslowski well, and indeed she's been a friend to nearly everyone of note in the Polish film world. So, welcome, Agnieszka. And Andres Veiel is from Germany, and he's made some outstanding documentaries, among them A Winter Night's Dream, The Survivors, and Black Box BRD, which was a searing look at the political scene in West Germany during the 1970s and 1980s. Andrew's latest his documentary, the one before last, Addicted to Acting, won the Audience Award at last year's Berlin Film Festival. It follows 4 young drama students over a period of 7 years, and their nerve-wracking auditions at Berlin's prestigious Ernst Busch Academy, and then follows their first appearances as professionals. And his latest film, which some of you may already have seen, is in this year's Panorama. It's called The Kick and deals with right-wing violence among teenagers in a small Brandenburg community. It's had a rave review in Variety yesterday, and it's appropriate, I think, that Andres should be with us today because he comes from the documentary field. He studied with Kieslowski when Kieslowski came in the early 80s to Berlin, and this was the area in which Kieslowski's own talent was born and developed. So welcome, Andres. And I'd like to play the first clip, which is an extract from a nice satirical short documentary, which Kieslowski made in 1966 when he was already at the Łódź Film School. And it's very rarely shown, and I should point out that these DVDs, or some of these DVDs, come from Kino in New York, who've done a terrific job, along with Facets, to promote Kieslowski's work in the United States. So could we have the first clip, please? When did you first become aware of Kieslowski? Did you meet him, or were you aware of some of his films first? When did he first come into your consciousness as a filmmaker?
I met Christoph for the very first time in my life in 1988. Had never seen him, and must admit only knew one film, short film about killing. And short film about killing became the very first film that won the very first European Film Award. It was the first time we did this. Christoph won it. And he went on stage, and the first line I heard him speak and say in person was just one line. By accepting the award, he said only one thing. He said, "I hope Poland is actually part of Europe, receiving the European Film Award." And then he left, and that left a deep impression of me, because out of a sudden that whole award had a different necessity than before. It was not just an award, out of a sudden it was important and necessary. And we met during that ceremony quite often, because Christoph told the story, so I'm allowed to tell it. Because Christoph had a bladder infection, so he had to go to the toilet all the time. On the toilet, he said, I always encountered the same people. There was always Marcello Mastroianni, who had to go to the toilet to smoke a cigarette because he was so nervous. And there was always Wim Wenders, who had to wash his hands. Now, I don't know why I would have washed my hands, maybe in innocence, I don't know. But the three of us met repeated times, and Christoph concluded that that was his idea of European cinema. 3 guys meeting all the time, because one had to pee, one had to smoke, and one had to wash his hands. I think it's a great image for European movies.
In fact, he, as many people will know, he was a chain smoker, and that's what ultimately killed him. And when he was asked why he didn't go to Hollywood, he said, how could I work in a country where I can carry a gun, but I can't smoke a cigarette? And I think, Agnieszka, what was he like at the time he made that film? Do you remember him in the late 60s? Do you have an image of Christoph?
It works?
Yes, it works.
Good. I met Krzysztof first time in 1971. I was studying in Prague Film School, and all Polish directors of this generation was studying Łódź. So I didn't know them. And when I graduated with Prague, and I came back to Poland because this political situation in Czechoslovakia became unbearable, and Also, I spent some time in prison, and so it wasn't the future for me in Prague anymore. I came back to Poland, and I didn't know my colleagues, my fellow students or my fellow filmmakers, I knew only one, who was a young and very talented cinematographer and after director, and he died in Himalaya 2 years later, Stanisław Latało. And he organized the meeting with another Polish filmmakers. It was, I remember, Tomasz Zygadło, Marcel Łoziński, and Krzysztof Kieslowski. And we shared our experiences. He was telling me about what was the 68 in Poland. I was telling what was 68 in Czechoslovakia. We've been speaking about the political situation and the situation in Polish and Eastern European cinema. And everybody was talking a lot. I was talking a lot. And only one man was silent. It was Kieslowski. He was smoking and telling nothing. But anyone said something, immediately they turned toward Kieslowski, like searching for his acceptance or opinion or something. So I understood that he is the very important one. And he was preparing in this time, he was shooting a political documentary called The Workers' 70, which had to speak about the strikes and about the workers' movement in 1970, which was quite important movement politically. They shot a lot of footage, and they hoped, it was Krzysztof and I think Zygadło and somebody else, it was like the joint documentary. And they planned to make the long feature documentary out of that, and they believed that it will be released. But before they finished, it was taken by the state television and totally recut. It became the piece of the communist propaganda. And I think that it was like the turning point for Krzysztof Kieślowski, and he understood exactly that he has to find the way to express himself in the different ways, that he has to find the way to speak about reality, about his reality, about the mystery of the life, about the politics, about the human beings, not using the direct tools of the any kind of the reportage or straight documentaries. It was his beginning to search for different kind of the filmmaking. But it was his, I think, first big disappointment that he cannot trust the reality.
Well, our next clip is, by sheer coincidence, absolutely on the button there, because it comes from the end of Camera Buff, when this frustrated filmmaker finds that his work will not be accepted by the television, so he literally exposes the film in a fit of temper. So could we have the second clip, please? What attracted you as a young potential documentarist to him and his style and his way of teaching?
I met him in the early 80s, and I have to say in the very beginning he was just, I knew amateur, camera buff, but I didn't know what kind of impact he would later have for me, because it started very early that he came to Berlin, to the Künstlerhaus Bethanien. It was not just a workshop, it was a course over the term of 1 year. And the title of this course was The Blind Spot in Our Brain, that meant for him to discover the obstacles why each of us, we were just a group of 5 or 6 students, each of us had a special obstacle or problem, maybe to go deeper or whatever. And in terms of my approach, he said, Andres, I think you have some sort of problem. I said, okay, that's nice. Let's go into it. And he said, I think, Andres, you have a problem with me, with authorities. And I said, okay, but how do we solve it? And he said, make a film about your father, a fiction film, at 3 different stages. One sequence at the age of, let's say, 8 or 9, one sequence at the at this age of 30 or something and very old. And there's only one task, the necessity that in the very end, the audience, they have to love you, Father. And said, okay, this is not very the easy way. But I tried hard, and I have to admit, in the very end, I worked for half a year with 3 different actors, and I tried very hard to solve the task. And in the last sequence, I decided that this character should have a cancer of eye cancer, and maybe he dies and he meets the sun. So I thought there should be some sort of pity for this guy. But in the very end, I have to admit, I failed. He said, Andres, you are on the way, but it's not the right feeling of love. So I had to redo the whole thing. I tell the story because he was very demanding. He wanted to make some sort of small Kieslowskis out of us. And so it was a roller coaster. Sometimes I hated him. I felt totally down, and I felt, well, there's no way to become a filmmaker at any day. I give it up. And the next day he came and said, Andres, start from the beginning. Think about the idea. Tell me the idea. If you have something to say it in 3 sentences, and then we think about the film. And I said, oh my God, now I have to think about 3 sentences. And I did it. And then he said, okay, now we do it this and this and that in that way. And in the very end, we had a fantastic script, but I felt it's a script of Kieslowski. It's not mine. So I started to do it again. And so you see, it was not just a normal way of education. It was something which was very ambivalent. Sometimes I thought, well, I become a psychologist. It's the better way. But in the very end, I said, okay, I have to get out of the shadow. I have to find my own way. I have to kill him, kill your darling, kill your father. And this was about 1989. I killed him in the way I didn't see him anymore. And in the very end, after he died, I felt how deep I missed him so much. But it was much later. I felt the impact. I felt how much he gave to me.
In 1981, he made Blind Chance, and we're going to see a clip from that now. And Blind Chance deliberately has 3 different endings, and this is the ending that caused the most furore, controversy, and it's the one that Kieslowski liked most. And could we have that? It's the very end of the film. Blind Chance is something which is like a theme for Kieslowski. I mean, you find that in the trilogy and in Double Life of Veronique particularly. And I think in a way, in some of your films too, this sense of chance encounters, chance happenings. And I mean, did you feel a kind of spiritual kinship with him?
Yeah, but maybe more in the way that sort of changed in the course of his films than in the fact that we had a topic in common. Christoph's first films, especially the Decalogue, had a certain bleakness and a certain, I don't know what to compare it, certain existential or materialist abruptness. There wasn't much hope in them, but they're very honest and true. In a way, every man or every woman was in there for themselves. And Blind Chances were an important element that were driving stories or ending stories. And following his work then and seeing the amazing work he continued to do afterwards, I felt that something very important changed, and more so. Mm. And if you then see the 3 Colors to the very last film, my favorite film of his, and probably not only of his, that subject, that bleakness, and that there's that sort of stark existential hopelessness that was often there had changed. There was still, everybody was still in it for themselves, but there was a feeling that there was something that was connecting us all that was never there before, and there was some sort of transcendence that I don't know, I could never have predicted that seeing his first film, that was going to come up. It was not religious necessarily, or he would completely deny that, probably. But there was a feeling that there was more of a purpose, and that even blind chance had a purpose. And I think that is something that I admire very much, that he made that giant leap of faith in the course of his life. Even if he didn't become a religious man. Maybe he did.
Agnieszka, perhaps you could say something about the way that documentary in Poland is perhaps more important than any other country in the world, in that when you go to film school, the tradition is that you have to make documentaries and you have to then make a short feature before you can make a film for television and make a full feature for the cinemas. I mean, this is a kind of rigorous training which became famous, and the name of Łódź spread around the world because of that. And Krzysztof grew up in this, I mean, he went to that school, and I think he wrote that the whole idea of the Łódź school is to enable you to watch films and to talk about them, nothing else. What was your, I mean, is it true that documentaries have this fundamental place in Polish cinema?
Well, probably yes. Well, you know, I think documentary is important for any cinema, and especially now we can see with the contemporary cinema that documentary in some way takes over, you know. And when I watch Polish movies of last 10 years after the transition, only important movies which have been made, it have been documentaries. And but for Krzysztof, it was, you know, from the beginning, it didn't come because of the film education in Poland, or certainly because of some kind of the tradition. It was very important documentary filmmaker, Kazimierz Karabasz, who was also the professor in the film school. I think he was Krzysztof's professor as well, and was very orthodox about about the pureness of the documentary, you know, and about lack of any kind of the artificial intervention, and at the same time the artistic way to launch the documentary reality through the film. But Krzysztof started very, very soon, like in some way cheat about it, to manipulate with the, you know, with this form. And on the beginning he was very much like Karabasz wanted, and after he found that it's in some way stiff, that this form is like killing his like inspiration of it doesn't expresses the mystery of the reality well enough. So he started to play with that, and the natural consequences it was that he went further and further into the fiction, and Camera Buff is very much based still on his documentary style, and the structure is very like close to some kind of the documentary, but when you see Decalogue, Blind Chance, I think it was this big break. Blind Chance, which I think is probably one of his best films, and the most like revolutionary films, which inspires till now the generations of filmmakers. If you watch 21 Grams, for example, it's evidently, you know, it's the little child of the Blind Chance, and then he, you know, started to see the reality on different levels, and, you know, in a very polyphonic way, and it was a little dangerous trip to me, because I thought in some point you launch some kind of a little cheap philosophy, and it was a struggle between us when he was writing with Piesiewicz the trilogy. When I remember once I told to him, Krzysztof, that is the philosophy for the cooks, and he was kind of offended. But, you know, probably it's good to make the philosophy for the cooks. Maybe they need it.
I'd like to take up something with Andrzej that Agnieszka said about documentaries being so relevant today and so popular indeed, and Michael Moore leading the way, of course, with huge returns for any film he does. This is mirrored in publishing, the fact that non-fiction books far outsell fiction compared with 30 years ago. Is it your impression when you show your films to audiences that there's a response, that people want facts, they don't so much want fantasy today? Is it?
I don't think it's a question of facts. It's something beyond facts, because if you switch on the TV, you get facts, but the necessity to go to the cinema and see a documentary on the big screen, you want something, you want the second view on something which goes much deeper. And because we know if we switch on the television, we get just the headlines. And so people feel they want to go deeper into something which they don't get in the newspapers, which they don't get normally on TV. And so
analytical. Yeah.
The interesting point, I think it's also, in terms of Christoph, when I think back, it's also a moral question, because the turning point for him, we discussed it a lot, was the last documentary. We couldn't see it here. It's called Station, and it's a very simple film. He just took, I think, a camera, and he went to the main station in Warsaw, and it was like a camera who controls and shows people going to the lockers or buying a ticket. And it was very simple, because it was done in the time of, I think, in the martial law, when just before the martial law came up in Poland, and he wanted to show this atmosphere of control. But something happened. He was editing the film, and the police showed up, and they took all the footage. And why? Because there was some sort of robbery, and they wanted to find out, maybe Christoph shot these people. And he said, Andres, that was the reason. I felt I do something, but doing a documentary, I have the moral responsibility. Maybe something will be done with the footage, and I can't control. And that was one of the reasons why he said, okay, I won't do any documentary. And the second one was that he said, I want to go to an area beyond the intimacy which I can approach by a documentary. I want to go further, I want to go deeper. And I always said, why you have to go to fiction? Because when people trust you, it's not a question of voyeurism, because when people trust you, you can go very deep even if you don't show it. We discussed it a lot. But this was one of the crossroads.
Well, that voyeurism is not in the next clip, it's in the one after that. Exactly that phrase you mentioned applies to that next clip. But the one we're going to see now is from, not technically the Decalogue, it's called a short film about killing. And Kieslowski made these 10 films for television. He got the commission to do it, but then he expanded 2 of them. So, and these films were shown theatrically around the world. One was called a short film about love, and the other a short film about killing. And the first one has a very sort of Hitchcockian relentlessness about it, which reminds us a little bit of a film like Frenzy, for example. Could we have the next clip, please? Do you think there was a spiritual side to Christoph which made him take on the Decalogue, and which we find reflected also in the trilogy? It's not an orthodox religion, it's more a very deep spiritual sense.
I'm not sure if I should call it spiritual to begin with. It was maybe more a highly developed moral sense. Now, I mean, anybody can be moralistic about anything. What is so impressive about Christoph, and I think both of you will totally agree with that, and Andreas, your story of his lesson so much confirms that. For him, moral was an issue of your own life. So only if you could cope with it in your life, you had a right to even film it or think about it or show it. And if for anything, I think we should remember Christoph, and we're trying to remember him here 10 years later. It's not so much because the man died 10 years ago, but an attitude died 10 years ago that gets forgotten. That life and filmmaking and work are so closely linked and are so inevitably and urgently linked. I mean,
Another of our joint idols, Antonioni, didn't he say once that every camera angle is a moral choice? Every time you choose an
but
angle.
you have to live that. You can't just say it. He lived it, and that's why he was allowed to say it. And I mean, it seemed to me like we're almost talking about something almost ancient or forgotten today. If I look around, I mean, this man has, I think, the most important legacy to convey to people who start working today, because he said, live it, and then you can make a movie about it.
Yeah, for me, this film is one of the most important films of him. Why? Because we were talking in the beginning, or I was talking about the question of ambivalence. The most important scene is not the scene of the length of killing somebody. At this time it was, I think, 8 minutes, and it was the longest scene of killing. The most important scene is in the end, when if you see this scene, you think this guy is a monster. But then he's sentenced to death, and suddenly you feel some sort of empathy or even sympathy by very subtle means. And the turning point is so strong, and you are so confused afterwards, because it's not a moral question. Kieslowski, of course, was against death sentence, but it's much more that we have to consider this monster as a human being, and that was the human inside of Krzysztof, and that made him, I think, so strong.
The next clip is a short film.
Can I say
Sorry,
something?
yes, of course.
The metaphysical or religious questions, of course, was important, and this moral issue was something which is like glue to Krzysztof as a kind of specific sign. But I think what is the most important is this question about the tolerance, which Andras was talking about, and which surprises me when you say that you had to kill him because you had the impression that he overshadows you. And some students we had together, or some students I was talking to, had the similar impression. At the same time, probably Krzysztof was the most tolerant teacher I ever seen. He never wanted you really to be himself, He just felt that the people expect him to be some kind of the moral authority, and he was giving in the most honest way you can give, the best he thinks he can give you. And after it became his prison in some way, when he became so famous, and he was traveling over the world and, meeting people and meeting the audiences and meeting the film critics and film students and so on, the people was asking him like, you ask some kind of the guru, not only how to make movies, not only what it is making movies, but also what the life is about, what the future will be. And he felt some kind of the duty to try to answer those questions, which became impossible, very tiring also. I think that, it wasn't cigarettes really which killed him. I think it was this kind of the growing duty to respond to the expectations. So in his films, what is, I think, the most beautiful is exactly that anyone, the killer, the stupid, vulgar taxi driver, the communist secretary in the factory, anyone is a human being with as Hegel said, with the totality of the object. And it wasn't easy, because, especially in the country like Poland, which was never very tolerant on any level. And when, during the Solidarity time, for example, he did the movie No End, when he showed both sides in very, in very ambiguous way, but in very beautiful way as well, and he was actually attacked by everybody. The people didn't want to see other as a human being. The people very want to see him as an authority figure or enemy or something. The people are very uncomfortable with this complexity of the moral judgment and the complexity of the human's destiny, and that it was what he really tried to express. And I don't think that was always understood.
Do you think that's why he declared he wasn't going to make movies anymore? Because he couldn't cope with that demand anymore?
I think so, yeah. I think that he was just exhausted, He felt that he's giving, and in the same time he felt that he was losing himself, you know, like projecting what the people expected from him. It wasn't him anymore. He felt empty for sure. He lost his like incredible playfulness and joy of life, and he became like old, very, you know, tired, bitter man, depressed man. Like during 5 years, he aged like 20 years or something. If you remember meeting him at the beginning of age, after it was like suddenly an old guy, and he was only 53 when he died. So it was like he wanted to save his life, and that's why he stopped it.
So Andres mentioned this voyeurism, and you've mentioned ambiguity, and in this next clip from a short film about love, we see a man spying on a woman, and it's a scene we've seen in many films, whether it's Brian De Palma or Alfred Hitchcock, Michael Powell, but it's interesting technically, this clip as well. I'll explain later. So could we have the next one, please? It's from a short film about love. I think this voyeurism is a theme you also get in Red, for example, when Irene Jacob, and we'll see a scene from that later, when she visits the Jean-Louis Trintignant character. What was that appealed to him? Do you think it was this moral ambiguity that made him have these scenes of voyeurism?
It sounds strange, but I was talking about the scene with him, and I always felt some sort of guiltiness. And I didn't understand it, but he told me something like, I, as a filmmaker, I do something, and that was one reason I was talking about this little film Station, and I can really take all the responsibility which I have to take. What could be the impact later for somebody else? And so he was all the time dealing with this huge moral demand which he put on himself. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many, if you look at his films, you see many little reflections on these questions.
Wim, I'm going to read a sentence from his interview book where he says, all my films are about individuals who can't quite find their bearings, who don't quite know how to live, who don't really know what's right or wrong, and are desperately looking. Well, that's something I think that could describe much of your work.
Yes. Yes, and I think we shared the idea that filmmaking was a process to understand ourselves.
A quest.
Sometimes better, a quest. And I mean, his films all were detective works into the human soul and discoveries. And even the subject of voyeurism that we just saw, that is repeated as also strictly as audio voyeurism in the case of Red. It's, in a strange way, it's the most inbuilt subject in filmmaking. It's almost not a theme. Anything you do evokes the question any time you put up a camera. And I wish I could see that little film Station, because I haven't seen that. I wish I could see that. But each time you do it, you face the subject, but it never really becomes or at least not so often becomes a theme. And it's, I think, very typical that for Christoph, because he's so honest, that he brought this inbuilt problem of the filmmaker to the surface.
Well,
in a different way, let's say, than Hitchcock.
Yes.
Where it was strictly treated as a thriller issue.
Yeah. Although it's interesting that when we had Park here yesterday, and he was saying that his three main influences were Hitchcock, Shakespeare, and Kafka. And I see that Christoph, among writers, quotes Shakespeare and Kafka too. So there is this which links people from different cultures, filmmakers I mean, from different cultures and different traditions. Well, the Decalogue was such a huge success around the world that Kieslowski was able to come to France and make a film called The Double Life of Veronique, which opened at the Cannes Festival in May 1991, took everyone by storm. Irene Jacob won the Best Actress Award and stunned people because I assume that Kieslowski had much more means at his disposal, so that the technique of this film was so overwhelmingly assured that he seemed to move into a new dimension. And I've mentioned Preisner's music, and this became a very important partnership between them, and it would be continued into the three colors, blue, white, and red. Unfortunately, the rights of Double Life of Veronique have been tied up for ages, and Marion Kamitz has only recently managed to disentangle the DVD rights, with the result that there's no DVD of this film in France, in Poland, in Germany, in the United States, or in Britain. But I kept a Laserdisc from the early 90s, and these wonderful technicians up here have been running around all morning to find a Laserdisc player so that we can play one rather muddy extract from Double Life of Veronique. But I think it's such an important film, and it introduces an important theme, and it's a very sinister and disturbing moment when the Polish Veronica suddenly sees what seems to be her double in a scene in a Krakow square. So can we try and play have you got the Laserdisc player up and running? Okay, let's go. It seems to me that in this film and the three final ones that followed it, there's a new kind of romanticism in a way in Kieslowski's work. Picking up on what Wim said, he seemed to become almost more optimistic as opposed to pessimistic about life. I mean, was that your impression, or am I just being romantic myself when I say that?
Well, you are certainly romantic, but I think it's like different, like discovering more straightforward the sense of beauty, which I see in those films. And when we've been doing films in Poland, documentaries or feature films in 70s and early 80s, it was, our aim, it was to show the reality naked and not embellish it. And when we've been casting the actresses, I remember, we've been looking, and if you see the actress in Camera Buff or even, you know, Blind Chance, if some actress was too pretty, you can be sure that she will be not cast. And when Krzysztof did the films and he was looking for his alter ego, for his main hero, it was mostly quite ugly, a little strange looking guy, right? It started to change with Szapowowska in the short film about love and in No End, but still, the reality, it was something which was ugly, claustrophobic, gray, dark. And then suddenly he went to France and he discovered, you know, that the cities are beautiful, that the women are beautiful, and that the light can be fantastically beautiful, that the food is, you know, so elegant.
That's it. And he put a golden, he explains that he put a golden yellow filter over the camera throughout Double Life.
But look at the short film about killing. It was like gray, a gray, green color filter, and here you have such a beauty. So yeah, he fell in love with this beauty, and in the same time he felt all the time that it's not his word, and that maybe he's kind of the imposter of, you know, being here, and it's why he represented in some way himself in the film White as this, you know, short, a little fat, a little ugly Polish guy who doesn't speak French.
Maybe wants to say.
Yeah, I want to say something. When I saw that film for the first time, and watching Irene Jacob in this film, for me, was like an hour zero of cinema. It was like it all started again from scratch, because, I mean, lots of films have shown beautiful women, of course. But Krzysztof discovered, as you said, beauty for himself in the film, and the joy of discovering that is the great thrill of the film. I mean, and that's why people could share that joy. I mean, most people deal routinely with beauty, and he discovered it.
And he brings out the best in an actress very often actors can do very bad work outside their muse, and I think Irene Jacob regarded him as a muse, just as Monica Vitti regarded Antonioni or Dietrich and Sternberg. There was a magic there, and in the next clip we have a scene from Blue where he takes an equally beautiful woman, Juliette Binoche, but we also pick up on the voyeuristic theme again as Juliette Binoche tries to track down her dead husband's mistress. So can we have that clip, please? Andres, when you see a film like this and there's a scene in a toilet, it reminds me of what Wim said right at the beginning, that he went to the toilet, and that's where he would see him. And he chooses very realistic sites, doesn't he, for his locations.
When I see the scene, I have to think about our last meeting. We were talking about toilets, but in another sense, because we were talking about his development and talking about. He said, "Well, Andres, if I think back about the 80s when we met," he said, "Of course I considered myself as a political filmmaker, but now I have to tell you something. I'm fed up of politics. For me, if I go to a toilet and there is some sort of paper in this toilet, then everything is fine. Why should I take care about politics anymore?" And it was really, I was upset about this sentence. And always when I see this scene, I think about his question and the necessity of having the toilet paper, and then I'm fine. Of course, he was not. It was this side of I felt a deep pain. I felt that he, doing the trilogy, I felt of course, he felt somehow alienated. He said, "I don't know which is my home anymore. Maybe I have to go back to Poland. Maybe I have to live in France." He told me, well, all of the crew fell in love with the main actress, Irene Jacob. And then he said, "Well, but you know how old I am." And I always felt this lack of something, the deep longing and the pain. Something was lost. And so it's not only the toilet, it's always something more.
Well, in the next clip from White, the second film of the trilogy, I've chosen this clip because it shows how well he uses a single location. In this case, it's the Paris metro. So could we have the next clip, please? I think that when you said that he brings out so much in Irene Jacob, part of that is this use of close-up, so that you really have an intimacy and you really get close to the character. And in that scene, it was very, very judicious use of close-ups.
I wish I could I could show you this close-up here, because I just found a ladybug and Marienkäfer. You see, it was, and this guy was talking about his bad luck, and at the same moment. And you asked me about close-ups, and here it is. There is a ladybug in the house. I think that is a miraculous answer to your question.
So we have one final clip now, and then we'll open it up to questions. And the final clip comes from Red, for many his greatest film. It was the year, unfortunately, in which Clint Eastwood was president of the jury in Cannes, and so they gave it no prize whatsoever, even though I think everyone who saw it was overwhelmed by the picture. And in the scene we're going to see, Irene Jacob discovers Jean-Louis Trintignant, who incidentally had not made a good film for many years, and Kieslowski resurrected him and gave him this incredibly raw and unsympathetic part, and he took it on and turned in a fabulous performance. So here you'll see her discovering that he, like so many people in Kieslowski's world, have been spying. Can we have the last clip, please?
I saw this film for the last time, Red, in Warsaw a couple of months ago at the festival, because I was going to do an interview about Christoph. And so I said, give me a DVD player in the room, and overnight I'd see a couple of movies again, and then we'd talk. And of course it was late, and the only film I could see in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock at night was Red. And I wept through the entire film. And I thought, and it reminded me that the only use of filmmaking is to really grab for the stars and go as far as Christoph did with that one, emotionally, and at the same time showing how film creates responsibilities, links a humanity between the screen and the viewers. In this case between these very unlikely people, this young woman and this grumpy old man. So, I don't know. I saw it and I thought this was the greatest movie ever done, and we should all try to get a little closer to that. So that's my only answer.
We've actually technically run out of time, but I think we can go on another 10 minutes. So can we have another question, please? Someone with a microphone?
Yeah, hello.
Yes, Sister.
I'm Alexander, and it seems that like the best people leave earlier, the earliest, and that a lot of good and creative people, maybe just for that reason, that they're like really aware of the reality and they'll have so much thinking to do about it, go away. But that's the question I wanted to ask all of you. Could you imagine a kind of films or that Kieslowski might do today if he was alive?
Agnieszka, you want to take that first?
Well, I don't know. It's I think that what was so fascinating about Krzysztof's cinema, that it was unpredictable. It means it had a very strong voice and style, and I don't think that he will ever lose his voice or style, but what kind of films, I don't know. He was surprising me over this 20 years when he was doing movies, and or 25, and I actually think that he will be not very happy in the current cinema. So, in some way, I'm not sure even if he was in good health, and so he will be keeping making movies. I don't know. I quite often, think about him and even dream about him, and on several situations, I can tell, Krzysztof will be amused by that, or Krzysztof will like that. About the toilet story, when the Polish Pope died, which was great event, very big event for the world, but especially for Poland, the two Polish presidents happened to be at his funeral. One, it was Lech Wałęsa, who was the first Polish post-communist president and anti-communist guy, and another, it was Aleksander Kwaśniewski, who was the communist and who was elected after Wałęsa, who won with Wałęsa the presidential elections. And Wałęsa hated this guy. He really hated this guy. When they have the presidential debate on the television, and Kwaśniewski wanted to give him his hand, he said, "To you, sir, I can only give you my leg." So they didn't talk for this, I don't know, 10 years or how long. And during the funeral of the Pope, they met by chance in the toilet. And both of them were very moved by the loss and grief, and they decided that they will become friends now. So after peeing, they shook their hands, and actually, first thing Wałęsa did, he invited Kwaśniewski to his birthday party, and Kwaśniewski came to his birthday, and so on and so on. And I thought, wow, Krzysztof would love it.
Could have made a good short film from that.
It will, yeah. Anyway, he will be really happy, when he will hear the story. So I'm thinking about him as a live person, but I'm not thinking about his potential movies or something. Just don't think about it.
I ask myself what remains. I think when I think about what is the core of Krzysztof, then I think about one sentence. He always said, the most important thing is trust to your inner voice. Don't think about too much about markets. Of course, you have to think about the market, but think first of all what you really want to say, and go deep into it, and then don't make a compromise follow the inner voice. And I think this is the attitude, and I think this is the attitude the cinema of today needs, and that's why Christoph is still present.
Well, many years ago, Libération, the French paper, ran a supplement in which they asked filmmakers around the world why they directed films, and some of the answers ran to 2 or 3 pages, and Kieslowski's answer was simply, because I don't know how to do anything else. And so this gave him a kind of notoriety.
It's not true. He was very good, carpenter. Yeah. And he can repair the car, for example, And
he could light cigarettes. Yeah.
Well, stop with those cigarettes. It's, it's not so important. He was very, very skilled man. I think that he was able to survive doing something else.
There is a concrete answer to the question. I mean, an actual very concrete answer. Because as much as Agnieszka is right that after he declared he was not going to make any movie anymore, and he was grumpy and in bad spirits and completely exhausted for a while, and then I had the privilege of meeting Christoph about 10 days before his operation, before his death, and we met in Warsaw, and he was changed. He was cracking jokes, and then I also asked him, so you're not that serious anymore about stopping? He said, what do you mean? I've started writing. And he had started working on the trilogy of Heaven, Hell, and Purgatory. And I think that's the very concrete question, answer to the question. Yeah. He would have made these 3 movies. And
that's right.
And imagine if he could have made them. Imagine. Just imagine.
And for the record, we should say that Heaven was made by Tom Tykwer and was at the Berlin Festival a few years ago. And Hell has been made by Denis Tanovich. And of course, the fact that neither of those films was really successful illustrates what we've lost in Kieslowski, I think. One more question, and then I think we really have to let these distinguished guests go their different ways.
I don't know.
One more question.
Hello? I'm over here. Hi. Okay, my name is Carita. I'm a composer and writer. And my question is, I am very touched by everything Kieslowski that I've seen by Kieslowski, because I know it just touches me every time. So I wanted to ask, was he a musician as well? Because I don't know. Because in his films, I know that Preisner was I don't know if he was his best friend, but I can feel the relationship that they have through watching their work together. And my question is, he's so musical in his way of filmmaking, his way of the images and the way he transmits through the actors and the camera and everything. And was he a musician as well? That's my question.
No. He even didn't know the music very well, And he loved singing, but it was always out of tune. So we've been driving in the cars very often, in the same car, on the long distance trips, and Krzysztof was singing, and I also out of tune, so it was...
But Preisner, when he came here to the campus 2 years ago, said that very often Kieslowski would say to him, listen, I just want some music over this section. I want it to be sort of romantic, lyrical. Go ahead and do it. And Preisner would go away and come back, and he would play it for Kieslowski, and he would listen very seriously, and he would say, yeah, that's fine. And I think, though, that there was a symbiosis, you're right. There was some kind of musical sensitivity in his work, even if he wasn't a musician himself. There's a rubato which goes through all his films. Andres, would you agree that there's a musical element in his films?
I think so, because when you think about the subtle way how he creates a rhythm, there must be an element of a composer, even if he's all the time out of tune.
And he and Preisner invented this bogus Flemish composer of the 19th century for the Double Life of Veronique and in the trilogy too. So they seem to have a lot of fun doing that.
And the very act of writing the music in the story of Blue is almost the question, is almost the answer to the question. I mean, the whole story revolves about the recreation of that score. And that is such fantastic music, and it's so integral to the story that I think music must have meant a lot to him, even if he couldn't hold a tune.
No, Preissner, by the way, he wasn't the composer neither. It means he was the amateur. He didn't know the notes. He was unable to write the partition till quite late. He had just, it was easy for him to come with the melodies, and how he started to compose the songs for the famous Krakow cabaret. And after he learned, of course. But Krzysztof, I think they made this journey together in some way. I think music was fascinating for Krzysztof, but certainly he was a musician in the regular terms.
Well, I hope that this session has proved once and for all that Kieslowski is one of the great filmmakers of our time, and that we sorely miss him, and that for young filmmakers he's a wonderful example, both technically and, well, not spiritually, let's avoid that term, but artistically. And I'd like to thank Wim Wenders and Andres Veiel and Agnieszka Holland from taking time off. Agnieszka's come from New York. Wim's always on the run. Andres is based here, but has taken time out from promoting the kick. Much appreciated. Thank you so much, and thank you to the audience for coming.